He lent his best friend $15,000. His friend never mentioned it again. Not once. In 20 years. Then his friend died and left a letter. And the letter changed everything Calvin thought he knew about the man, the money, and the 20 years of silence between them. In the world, there are two types of people. The type that doesn't remember what they owe, and the kind that do not cease to count. Calvin Mensah had been wondering for 2 decades what kind of a man his best friend was. He now had an answer to his question. He was sitting in a lawyer's office on a Thursday morning, still wearing the black tie he had donned 3 days ago on the day of his funeral, and had not been able to get rid of yet, wearing the black tie, holding a letter in the handwriting of another man, who had been a structural engineer and wrote like one, in the exact same architectural style, the same precise lines, with care and no wasted ones. Calvin, for when I am gone, don't open this prior to. Calvin never opened it before. He had been tempted. He had been put on to this safe for the last 15 years, for as long as 5 years, Raymond having told him about it once, casually, like he would tell anybody something he wanted to be known. In 15 years he had never asked a question about the substance of the information. He had forgotten it. He had never returned to it, but had stored it away. So it would have meant that he'd acknowledged that he was thinking about it. Thinking about it would have meant that the $15,000 he had handed his best friend in an envelope on a Tuesday afternoon 20 years ago in the Barclays parking lot, without asking for the documentation or interest or a timeline for repayment, because the man was his best friend and best friends didn't need contracts, had never stopped mattering. For 20 years he had told himself it didn't matter. For 20 years he has been lying to himself. And now Raymond was dead at 51, no warning, no dignity, the heart attack of which a man would have been the first to suspect a new kind of cancer. The letter in Calvin's hand, the lawyer's pity, man who had sat beside too many grieving people to know how to say the right word at the right time. Calvin examined the envelope. He considered it for almost 20 years. He opened it. Some friendships are so strong that you don't realize how they are holding up the rest of the world until they're not there. Calvin Mensah and Raymond were close friends since they were in 11th grade. The world before them was so much a part of their lives that they couldn't recall it. In the first week of secondary school, they had met, 2 boys from different areas who had come to the same form room and decided, with the clear sense of pre-adolescents who hadn't yet learned to second-guess their impulses, that they were going to be important to one another. The louder one had been Raymond. Raymond was not brash, he never was, but had a social ease that Calvin always admired and never understood. A natural fluency of the language of rooms and people that made him the man who everyone wanted to be at their table. He was funny in the way people are who are also smart, the punchline hitting exactly, never coming back on anyone's ass, always being a little more on point than what it was. He was a natural for making others feel blessed to be around him. Calvin was quieter, more interior. In his family, his father's quietness was great and instructive. You learn things by observing rather than by asking. Competence was shown more than stated. It had become so ingrained that it was native to him. And that is how it is for everyone else until the time when they don't, which is always the right time. They'd been a team that worked together in a particular way, that only came together in their boyhood, and only under the right conditions. Complementary in just the right ways, similar in just the right ways, and different enough they don't compete for the same space. They attended the same university, but different faculties. Raymond was on the civil engineering faculty, Calvin was on the finance faculty. They had been through their 20s together. When things went wrong, and when they did, they had been through the up and down of relationships, of professional blips and tips, of self-discoveries and missed ones. At the age of 30, they had both come to the end of their lives in shape. Calvin was employed in corporate finance. It was a good job, paid well, no drama, just a job. He had established a little-known and acknowledged structural engineering business, had married a woman named Diane who was warm and sharp, and who not only dealt with him, but was genuinely fond of the presence of Calvin in her life, had purchased a house in a neighborhood that he had carefully selected. The house was where it started. Raymond's business was almost about to undo the good work of the 31-year-old Calvin. The reason is that not only was Raymond incredibly competent, but he had a situation where a large client went into administration 4 months after he had sent them a bill and a second job, which, for whatever reason, was not on schedule but was on the wrong side of a materials cost overrun, had taken his company's reserves, and the bank loan had come due at the wrong moment. Calvin learned about it the same way he learned about most things that matter, that is, by reading Raymond. 20 years had passed since they first met, and now, Calvin spoke no words to Raymond. At dinner, he could tell that there was a bit of tension in Raymond's jaw. His laugh that was too little too late at puns. When he refilled his glass at an inopportune moment. He didn't say anything for 2 weeks. Let Raymond carry it in the way Raymond carried things, in a way that's private, with his jaw set, with his back straight, with a determination to solve his own problems entirely intact. On a Tuesday evening, he drove to Raymond's house, sat at the kitchen table, and without pretext said to Raymond, "Tell me the number," while making tea in the background, and Raymond feigned a casual manner, saying, "Oh yeah?" Raymond studied him for a long time. "Calvin." "The number, Raymond." Raymond told him the number. Raymond said to him the number. The price was $15,000. The exact sum required to pay the loan and to make up the firm's cash flow deficit until the next expected payment could be made. Not a fortune. Not a small amount, either a large portion of Calvin's easily accessible savings at the time, being carefully saved for a 2-year purchase of a property. Calvin nodded. He said, "Okay, I will pay you back, all the money back," he replied. "With interest." Calvin blew out the word. It was a gesture he had subconsciously appropriated from Raymond's father, one who used it to wrap up a discussion which had already ended. "No, it is not a loan," said Calvin. "My life is my life, and that is what I am doing." "Calvin, it's 15,000. I know what it is, I believe." He saw under the surface of his best friend, under the surface of Raymond's calm, conscientious demeanor, the thing that Raymond had never revealed to anyone, but only to one person, the one he called his best friend, and that thing was the thing of the proud man who knew he couldn't bear it. "I know just exactly what it is, and I want you to let me do it." A few seconds passed and Raymond became silent. Diane had ceased to make tea. Finally, Raymond said, "Okay," quietly. The money was moved the next morning in the car park of a Barclays bank. Calvin gave Raymond an envelope because Raymond had said that he didn't want to do it electronically, because it was what it was and Calvin knew that. They made no record of it. They drove away in separate cars. For the next 20 years they never, and not directly, mentioned it again. Calvin had hoped that Raymond would have mentioned it. He'd hoped for it like one would hope for a storm that has been predicted. Just not dread, but a knowledge that it's coming. In the first year, he had seen the conversation in his mind numerous times. Raymond seating him down. Raymond with an envelope containing the number. Raymond putting a statement that would close the loop nicely. The chat was never made. 1 year went by. Calvin told himself, Raymond is rebuilding. It's not the right time right now. But when the time is right, my good friend will. A year later went by. The absence of the funds had caused delays in Calvin's purchase of the property, which he finally did a year later than had been planned, at a slightly lower price than he had hoped. He has never told Raymond about this. It was the 3rd year now. Raymond's firm had rebounded and more. It was doing well, it was growing, it had 2 young engineers working for them, and it had enlarged its office. Calvin had been at the new office opening, had drunk champagne and had spoken a speech, had meant every word of his speech. It wasn't mentioned at all that the money was paid. After 5 years, Calvin had lost his sense of anticipation for the conversation. After 10 years, he was almost sure that it didn't matter. By year 15, he had created around it an entire system of justification and accommodation, and in doing so had incurred more costs than he could ever add up. He had told nobody. Not his wife, Priya, whom he knew was in the know, but not the financial history. Not his colleagues. Not his brother. The information he stored in the sealed room within him in which he places things too complex to take out and investigate. He was still the best friend of his brother Raymond. He had been at Raymond's children's christenings and birthdays and school plays. He had accompanied Raymond when his mother was sick and passed away. He had driven Raymond home from hospital on the night that Diane's appendix was removed because Raymond was not fit to drive himself home, and had spent 4 hours in the waiting room without being called for. He had been the best man at Raymond's vow renewal at their 20th anniversary. He had written a speech that had gotten Diane to cry, and he had had an expression on his face that contained everything 2 men who have known each other for 40 years can contain in an expression. He'd done everything. For 20 years she had lain in the sealed room, under all of it, $15,000, which she had become so accustomed to carrying that she had never stopped to ponder on the cost. Sometimes quiet communication is the strongest between friends. And sometimes it's simply quiet, causing harm together in the shadows. Calvin was home when Raymond died. He received his call at 11:43 p.m. from Diane. He was in bed and Priya in her, and the house was dark and quiet, and the quiet of that night was the quiet of a weeknight in a settled life. The voice on the phone was Diane's voice, the voice people take up when emotional reaction has gone and survival demands that you temporarily suppress it. A voice stripped down to its functional level, reduced to just the essentials. Calvin. It's Raymond. He's dead. Heart attack. It was really quick. After the call, Calvin sat up on the edge of the bed for a long time. A Tuesday morning in the parking lot of a Barclays bank was on the mind of he. He considered giving a speech at a vow renewal. Compared the idea for 40 years. Considered for 40 years. He thought about the sealed room inside him and the stone inside the sealed room, and he was sitting in the dark bedroom with all of it, and he didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Eventually Priya woke and put her hand on his back, and that was enough. This is the proper way to do it. He cried once. Later. At the bathroom at 3 a.m. and with the tap open. The unique private sorrow of a man who refused to enact his sorrow. The funeral was held on Saturday. A full church. Raymond was a familiar name, a well-known figure, a man who was widely admired and deeply appreciated, a man who freely gave warmth to others. Calvin sat in the front row, with Diane and her children, and heard the eulogies, which were all accurate and none complete, since no eulogy ever is, and thought about the version of Raymond which no one in that church knew apart from him. The one that was at a kitchen table 20 years ago, where he let his best friend see something that he didn't show anyone else. He was the last speaker. It was written by him the night before, without notes, in one sitting. He made a 7-minute speech. He didn't say anything about the money. He did not mention the sealed room or the stone. He spoke about 40 years of friendship, as though he knew that some things are best captured between the sentences. When he was done, the church was totally silent. At the time of this occurrence, Diane was holding his hand without either of them realizing what the time was. 3 days after the funeral, Diane called. She was in the process of going through the study of a competent woman, the process of being systematic and organized, and she had located the safe. She had known the combination, she had known it all along. The inside of the safe was the typical layout of a conscientious man's valuable papers. And a letter. She informed Calvin about the letter, and she did so with the special precision of one who had already decided that she should honor this letter, and honor it all the way. It has your name on it, Calvin. Just your name. And it says not to open it before. I haven't opened it. I would never. But I think you should come and get it. On the next morning, Calvin drove to Raymond's house. In the hallway, Diane gave him the letter, which was still in its envelope, and made him know that she had been living with this moment for a while, that the letter wasn't completely new to her, that Raymond had told her more than he told her. Calvin picked up the letter. He drove straight to his lawyer's office, something about the weight of this envelope saying that he shouldn't be alone when he opened it, and also because he was a man who knew the importance of witnesses for things that mattered. He was opposite his lawyer. He opened it. Sometimes quiet communication is the strongest between friends. And sometimes it's simply quiet, causing harm together in the shadows. Calvin was home when Raymond died. He received his call at 11:43 p.m. from Diane. He was in bed and Priya in her, and the house was dark and quiet, and the quiet of that night was the quiet of a weeknight in a settled life. The voice on the phone was Diane's voice, the voice people take up when emotional reaction has gone and survival demands that you temporarily suppress it. A voice stripped down to its functional level, reduced to just the essentials. Calvin. It's Raymond. He's dead. Heart attack. It was really quick. After the call, Calvin sat up on the edge of the bed for a long time. A Tuesday morning in the parking lot of a Barclays bank was on the mind of he. He considered giving a speech at a vow renewal. Compared the idea for 40 years. Considered for 40 years. He thought about the sealed room inside him and the stone inside the sealed room, and he was sitting in the dark bedroom with all of it, and he didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Eventually Priya woke and put her hand on his back, and that was enough. This is the proper way to do it. He cried once. Later. At the bathroom at 3 a.m. and with the tap open. The unique private sorrow of a man who refused to enact his sorrow. The funeral was held on Saturday. A full church. Raymond was a familiar name, a well-known figure, a man who was widely admired and deeply appreciated, a man who freely gave warmth to others. Calvin sat in the front row, with Diane and her children, and heard the eulogies, which were all accurate and none complete, since no eulogy ever is, and thought about the version of Raymond which no one in that church knew apart from him. The one that was at a kitchen table 20 years ago, where he let his best friend see something that he didn't show anyone else. He was the last speaker. It was written by him the night before, without notes, in one sitting. He made a 7-minute speech. He didn't say anything about the money. He did not mention the sealed room or the stone. He spoke about 40 years of friendship, as though he knew that some things are best captured between the sentences. When he was done, the church was totally silent. At the time of this occurrence, Diane was holding his hand without either of them realizing what the time was. 3 days after the funeral, Diane called. She was in the process of going through the study of a competent woman, the process of being systematic and organized, and she had located the safe. She had known the combination, she had known it all along. The inside of the safe was the typical layout of a conscientious man's valuable papers. And a letter. She informed Calvin about the letter, and she did so with the special precision of one who had already decided that she should honor this letter, and honor it all the way. It has your name on it, Calvin. Just your name. And it says not to open it before. I haven't opened it. I would never. But I think you should come and get it. On the next morning, Calvin drove to Raymond's house. In the hallway, Diane gave him the letter, which was still in its envelope, and made him know that she had been living with this moment for a while, that the letter wasn't completely new to her, that Raymond had told her more than he told her. Calvin picked up the letter. He drove straight to his lawyer's office, something about the weight of this envelope saying that he shouldn't be alone when he opened it, and also because he was a man who knew the importance of witnesses for things that mattered. He was opposite his lawyer. He opened it. There's always a higher cost of an unspoken thing than the thing itself, but sometimes, rarely beautifully, someone has been paying for an unspoken thing while you've been paying for it. It was in the early afternoon that Calvin drove home. He was standing in front of his house in his car for 20 minutes before entering the house. He was contemplating on Raymond. Not the professional, respected, and community-giving son of the late Ray. That was true, too. He was in the process of thinking of the Raymond only he knew. The one who sat around a kitchen table 20 years ago and let him see that which was not to be seen by anyone else. The one whose sole language seemed to be the language of the bank account that he had been depositing in for the past 2 decades. He was pondering over what it meant that Raymond had never told him. He'd been in denial for 2 decades, and he'd been in denial for 20 years as a forgetter. As a man who had been given something valuable, forgot that he had to pay the debtor a sum of money, and thought it had never existed. Amnesia of that kind of man who had been given something valuable and found it easier to forget that he ought to pay a sum of money to the debtor. He had been wrong about this, all wrong, entirely wrong, completely wrong, in a way that made 20 years of friendship he thought he knew different. Raymond was not oblivious to the memory. It had been 20 years and Raymond had remembered each and every month. He had only just recalled it in a room that Calvin could not see from. Calvin pondered on that. Of the rooms within men which you can never enter in after 40 years. The specific and awful solitude of carrying some private bitch I can't get a word out about. How easily Raymond had made everyone feel at ease, how communicative, how warm, the man everyone wanted at their meal, about how he had done it about the same as Calvin had done it, about saying the thing that mattered most. They were on opposite sides of the same wall, and each had been in the same room for 20 years without knowing of the other. He considered setting up a scholarship fund. But it had arrived in his head as it does in the lawyer's office, not as a plan but as a recognition. The money was Ray's. Its origin was Raymond. It had been 2 decades since his accumulation that was an expression of what he felt about Calvin. It was not the right thing to do with Calvin, not a moral question, but a purely aesthetic one. This is wrong in that its words are correct, but its structure fails to uphold the meaning of the sentence. This was indeed the right sentence for the scholarship fund. Engineering students. Raymond's field. Young adults starting out in the workforce who were in need of just what Raymond needed, a bridge. Some way to help them bridge the chasm between where they are and where they can go. It would be the Raymond Osei Foundation, he would call it. He would invest each of the $247,000 in it. On the Tuesday closest to the date of the parking lot in front of Barclays Bank, every year, he would call out the names of those who would receive the money. He said so that evening to Priya. All of it. The $2 million 2 decades ago. The sealed room. The stone. The letter. The account. The number. He had not meant to tell her anything, but when he began he could not stop, for the letter opened something in him that had been shut for a long time, and out came not only the story of Raymond and the money but the whole thing. 20 years of masking it up. This friendship, which was stronger than both could have claimed. The loneliness of carrying the thing you can't put down and can't look at and can't share. Priya was listening intently. It was her nature. It was her philosophy. She was someone who gave a whole-person response as if it were her duty. That she was a person who gave people a whole-person response with totality as if it was her responsibility to give it to them. That the most important thing you could do for another person was give her the whole-person response. After he had finished, she was silent for a while. Then she explained, "You've been wearing this for 20 years. Yes. And so was he. Yes." She took his hand. "He knew who you were, Calvin. He knew you, and he loved you anyway. That's what the letter says." Calvin looked at his wife. At the woman who knew him for 18 years, who loved him in a peculiar way, who knew the sealed rooms, who chose to stay. "Yes," he said. "That's what it says. A man's legacy is not what he built. It's what he made possible for others to build." 14 months after the letter, the Raymond Foundation was initiated. Those 14 months Calvin had spent working on it properly. The legal structure, the criteria for selection, the 2 engineering universities that he joined, the application process, the panel of judges including Diane, who had immediately agreed to it, and who had said as much as she knew it, had known more about the account than she had said. He had also done something in the 14 months he'd been there that he knew he wouldn't do at any other school. He had been corresponding with Raymond. No man was so grimy that he would gesture for the sake of gesture. Not a man that would be read by a letter. But a letter written by his own hand with proper paper, and stating the things that he would have said had Raymond been sitting before him. That he knew for a reason why Raymond had not spoken. That he too had done the same thing, on his side of the wall, for the same reasons. That they both had suffered because of the silence. That it was also, paradoxically, the creation of the account. And the creation of the account was the creation of the foundation. And it would create things that neither of them could create all on their own. It was in some way the most Raymond thing that ever happened. That he forgave him. That he was sorry also. He was angry about that, and angry in the right way. 40 years was not sufficient and knew it, felt it. That he loved him. He carefully folded the letter in half. He put it in an envelope. He placed it in his own safe, in the back, behind the important papers, because it was fireproof. He didn't write a name on it. He did not need to. On Tuesday, the first scholarships from the Raymond Foundation were handed out. 7 recipients. 7 young engineering students from 7 different universities who had been identified by their financial need, but also showed evidence of greatness and, over the protest of 2 of the panel, who felt this was too subjective, demonstrated that they had helped someone else without being asked. The ceremony was very modest. Conference in the room of one of the partner universities. With her children, Diane attended. Calvin's lawyer attended. The whole time Priya had been standing next to Calvin and had held his hand. Each person was given an envelope. The envelope contained the amount of the scholarship and 1 card. The card said, 20 years ago a man was in need of a bridge and his best friend built it without request. Construct a lasting creation. So when the time is right, make one for someone else. The Raymond Foundation. Calvin was at the front of that little room, and he looked at 7 young people holding their envelopes, and he saw in the way people look at things. Once you're given something that alters what is possible, and he felt something moving in him that was without a name, but they're in the same place. Not closure. He was not a man that thought in terms of closure. A truer end than closure. The understanding that there are debts that are not to be reckoned with. These are to be paid forward. Into the future. Into people you will never meet you go. It's what I'm doing, a man says to his closest friend as he shuffles an envelope while they are parked in front of a Barclays bank on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 decades ago, and the word loan is waved away. He shifted his gaze over to Diane in the room facing him. She was watching them and she knew what they had in the safe, and she had loved her husband completely, even the sealed room and the stone and the 20 years of money dropped in there each month, and she knew that, and she knew. She looked up. Their eyes met. That was the gesture that Calvin did, short, dismissive, one-handed. His fathers had closed out conversations that had ended, the one he had borrowed 40 years ago, without ever realizing it was Raymond's. Diane laughed. It had been since before the funeral that he had heard her laugh. It was like it was the voice of Raymond. He keeps thinking of the parking lot. He believes that he will forever. This isn't problematic, he has decided. Now 51, Calvin Mensah is a boy who grew up in the USA. Now 51, Calvin Mensah is a boy who was born in the USA. He visits the foundation office on Tuesdays in the morning. He does not need to attend every day because the foundation has a director and staff and operates efficiently, sort of like a finance guy learning an engineering lesson. But it's Tuesday and he's a man of the day that counts. He sits at his desk, he reads the monthly reports, he signs the things that need signing, he looks out the window at the city, he thinks about Raymond. No longer grieving. Or not just because of grief. The complicated, grown-up and fully human combination of feelings that you have toward a man who paid you something real for 2 decades, and who was also your best friend for 4 decades, and who was a man who loved you? Caught in a sealed room, his thoughts turn to that. His own. Raymond's. All the things they keep in their heads, the debt that builds up without being spoken. The love that cannot be articulated and finds its voice in the only way possible. The rooms inside every one of us. He imagines himself sitting across from Raymond and what he would say. He feels he could have said to me, "You could have told me." Then he considers Raymond will do the gesture, which is short and dismissive and right hand only, and say, "I know. I know." They would sit there, as always, like 2 men who had known one another for a long time, so that silence was a language. He gazes at the window. He grasps his pen. He gets back to work. If Calvin's story resonated with you at some point that you can feel, please comment now with the word Tuesday. This story changed on Tuesday, and I want to know how many of you felt it change on Tuesday. Before you leave, I have one thing to ask you. If you were Calvin, if you have found that letter, have a look at that number and read those 4 pages. What would you have done with the money? Would you have retained it? Do you want to return it to Diane? Or have done just what Calvin did? Describe it to me in the comments. I read them all.